how many people would be here at 5:30. And I said, oh, I bet it won't be more than 6 people. So, wow, I am so excited. Thank you all for hanging out. My name is Sheila Moran. I am very excited to present at this conference. We try to support the conference every year as a sponsor. We love NASW. We love social workers. We are a company of social workers. My background is in social work. I have a master's degree in social work, but actually I work in marketing. So I took a little bit of a turn. Turns out I'm better at buying billboards and talking people through their crises. And it's important to know your strengths, right? So I'm going to just briefly talk you through a few things that our company offers. I feel like I am always legally obligated to tell you about that, to make sure you know about every service we have here in West Virginia. I will be quick with that because I'm doing a whole presentation on this tomorrow at I think 3:30. And then I'm going to talk about problem gambling in West Virginia, how much gambling we have in general, the types of calls we get. I'm going to talk about the symptoms and risk factors for gambling addiction, and then I'm going to talk about our network, our referral system, what we offer people, how you can access help for any clients you work with through us. And then in case that you perhaps are someone in private practice offering therapy, I'm going to go over just a little bit of some of the initial steps that you may have that you may be able to offer clients that you're treating yourself for gambling addiction. And I will definitely end early enough to answer any and all questions in the chat and anything you want to throw out at the end. So with that, I will get started and just tell you a little bit about our company. If we were there in person, we would be exhibiting First Choice Services. I don't know how many of you know about us. We are in Charleston. We're up near the Y on the Hill. We've been around for 20 years. You may not have heard of our company, but you've probably heard of a few of our programs. 1-800-GAMBLER, obviously, which I'm going to be talking a lot about tonight. The Help for WV program, I hope you have all heard of that. That is our addiction and mental health hotline that has been around now for, I think, almost 6 years. This is a busy hotline, takes about 12,000 calls per year. This is a hotline that provides access and navigation. You know, when people are having mental health crises or addiction issues, they don't know where to turn, what kind of treatment they need, how to get in. It's a little bit of red tape sometimes, so we try to cut through that for them. 24/7 access to a real life human that's going to help you. Usually can get people into treatment within 24 hours and able to help with things like transportation, also able to help with de-escalation and crisis counseling. This line also recently became the Children's Crisis and Referral Hotline. So we offer services for parents, caregivers, foster parents, anyone who's concerned about a child's behavior. And that is also 24 hours a day. When people call us, they get obviously another real human who can help talk them through the situation of de-escalation if that is needed. And then referral often to one of the children's mobile response teams around the state. Our ACA Navigator program, this is for folks who don't qualify for Medicaid, Medicare, or health insurance through their employer or through their spouse, people who sort of fall in those cracks. And we offer, it's the same insurance you would get through healthcare.gov, but you have a human guiding you through it. And sometimes that's helpful. People might have questions about such a big purchase. And this program has changed a lot in the last few months, tremendously with the new administration. Suddenly, we have until August to take signups, which is a big change, and payments have decreased a lot. At this point, 4 out of 5 people in West Virginia who sign up get a plan for under $10 a month. So that's a big change. The thing is, you've got to re-sign up, even if you signed up back, in December. And so we can help you with that. All right. I'm not going to talk about it. We have a bunch of out-of-state lines too, and I won't talk about those. In-state, we have the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Hopefully you all are aware of that. Our folks answer that. And it's often some of the same people. So you might get the same folks who are answering, for instance, the Help for WV line. So we're well equipped to deal with anything that comes our way. Our West Virginia Tobacco Quit line, which helps people stop smoking. We provide a nicotine replacement therapy, and folks are eligible for this, almost anyone, whether it be Medicaid, Medicare, uninsured. There are a couple of insurance programs that have their own tobacco cessation, but generally most people are eligible and get these services for free and get free tobacco coaching. Our 211 program, we love this program. We partner with the United Way on this program, and this is another 24-hour line that offers social service, financial resources. So a lot of people call us and they need to know about where's the nearest feeding shelter, how can they get a clothing voucher, is there a moratorium on rent? They might have questions like that. We right now are the United Way is partnering with the Housing Development Fund with a rental assistance program. So we're helping a lot of people with that. So that's a great program. Our Jobs and Hope program, just read a nice story about that in the newspaper today. It's helping a lot of people. This is not like Monster or Indeed. This is a program that anyone can enroll in. It's not just for started out people in recovery, but anyone can seek assistance through this program. It's more than just finding a job. It's figuring out your options with employment, training, education, and these folks help break down barriers. Like if you have something like a DUI fine you can't pay, or something you need expunged from your record, or transportation issues, these folks help with that. Our 304 help program, it's our little bear niece there. This is our emotional strength line. So this is for anyone in the state to call 24/7 who are feeling like they need to speak to someone. It's not necessarily a suicidal line. We get a lot of calls from people who are just saying, hey, talk me through a panic attack, or I'm having relationship problems. I feel really sad. I feel anxious. I can't deal with this pandemic or the changes coming my way. But this is another 24/7 hotline open to anyone in the state, and we also offer online support groups. And finally, our peer recovery services. Like many of the groups you work with, we also have peers that work here and help people. And we have a few dedicated people in this program, but I will mention that of our staff here, which has now grown to 60, over half are in long-term recovery. So we are very proud of that. Okay, I got through that in 7 minutes. And And now I saw where there's a button that you can push to tell me to talk slower, but I'm not sure I can talk slower. We'll see. If you push it, I'll try if I see that. So that's First Choice Services. I'll stop talking about that, and I'll start talking about 1-800-GAMBLER, which is what you came here to learn about. But please don't hesitate if you have any questions at the end about any of our other programs, and I can talk about that. All right. Here we are. Slideshow from start. Treating problem gambling in West Virginia. You like our little sign there? So that's our sort of our version of Las Vegas here in West Virginia. I wish we were in person. It's so much more fun. I would have brought you treats and trinkets, donuts, things like that. And we have these in-person quizzes. So I can't really see you all to see how many of you are getting this right. I usually say how many casinos are in West Virginia. And most people get this wrong. The usual answer is 3, but there are, wait for it. There you go, there's 5. Mardi Gras, which most of you are probably familiar with, Hollywood in the Eastern Panhandle. We have Mountaineer in the Northern Panhandle, and right below that is Wheeling Island. And then people forget all about the Greenbrier, which is a casino, and people do take day trips too. So it is not just the people staying there necessarily. So those are the 5 casinos. And for many years on our helpline, you could almost do a layover of our calls and where those casinos were located. You know, we've been around for 20 years. And so that's where most of our calls were coming from. And if we were in person, I would ask you all, what do you think people were calling us about? Well, the answer is generally slot machines. You know, these casinos all offer horse and dog racing, parimutuel. They have, table games now, sports betting, kiosks, but really the slot machines from the casinos are the top thing that people would call us about if they were calling about casino gambling. Bingo. Gosh, a lot of people laugh and they say, is bingo really gambling? I don't know how many of you have been to a bingo hall here in West Virginia, but it is not like what you remember from kindergarten bingo. It is pretty serious business for a lot of people. One of the first calls I ever got was from a lady in Morgantown who had embezzled $250,000 from the law firm where she worked, so she could continue playing bingo. She ended up going to Alderson for 8 months. There are people who definitely, take their whole paycheck and walk out without it. So it can be a pretty serious ordeal for some people, and it's not all older folks. It's a stereotype, but I think that is not always true. And there are about 100, the last time I counted, which is per capita, a little bit more really than in many states. How many places to buy a lottery ticket? Well, I mean, this is every convenience store, every grocery store, right? There's a lot of these places, about 1,500. We don't get that many calls about scratch off tickets or Powerball. I think that may be probably the most common type of gambling that people do, but that does not account for most of our calls. I think that tends to be a little more likely to be casual than problematic gambling. Not always. I received a call once from a guy who was a woman. She had found her husband. She'd found like a whole trash bag full of dead scratch off tickets in the trunk of his car. And that's how she knew he had a gambling issue. How many VLT parlors are there? I don't know if you all know what a VLT parlor is, video lottery terminal parlor, video poker, a lot of different machines. In Australia, they call them the pokies or the fruit machines. These are basically little slot machines, and they are in places in West Virginia. A lot of times they're in standalone places. Like this one I have here. I took this picture in Charleston. This place I think is gone now, but sort of places like this, or sometimes in restaurants, places like that in communities. There are about 1,200, and I'm sure no one would have got that right. Nobody ever does. People usually say 100, 200, 300. I mean, right here, just in Kanawha County, I think we have probably 100. So definitely about 1,200 statewide, and each of these places has between 5 and 7 machines, 5 and 7 for these type of places. And then the fraternals, like the moose, the owls, the eagles, they have 10.
First, he's out. If I get second after you get the first,
we have somebody else speaking, don't we? Can you hear me? Okay. Online gambling, sports betting. Have you all noticed some ads for sports betting? Surely you have. I know if you're in Charleston or Morgantown, you have. You cannot get away from this. These signs that say free money, and then you got to read the fine print there. I will say, I just did a presentation to high school students. I don't get to do that often. And I asked them, I said, how many of you think that's really free money? And they were all a little more savvy than I thought. They're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, why do you think you might be offered free money? And then they sort of understood the concept here. Our answer to this was, don't be fooled. Gambling addiction can cost you everything. So, there are some signs here in Charleston that say land of newly minted millionaires. So, we do a fair amount of advertising, but it's hard to compete with. I'll talk a little bit about youth gambling later, but I know that they see that and it's hard to deal with. So for many years after, the casinos were around for many, many years, and then it's been nearly 20 years since the video poker parlors went up. And so then our calls really started to be almost all VLTs. I would say it ran maybe 85, 90% people playing the video poker machines. And not really what you'd imagine either. Most states have more men call than women. And we have traditionally had a 50-50 split, and that may be because that type of gambling appeals more to women. But our typical caller would be like a middle-aged, I don't want to say a housewife, but it would not be the stereotype that you have in your mind of like the high-rolling Las Vegas gambler at all. So for probably 18, 20 years, that was definitely most of our calls. But now with mobile sports betting being available and iGaming, which is, being able to bet on things like roulette and craps and slot machines online, now things have changed a bit. And for the first time ever this year, it looks like this type of gambling is going to take over and be more likely to be our number one source of calls. And you can imagine why that is. It's a lot more convenient, right? You don't have to get dressed up or go anywhere. You literally have the mechanism in your pocket. So this is happening fairly rapidly, I think. Another type of new gambling that has just come on our radar in the last few months. Robinhood over here, the reason we have Robinhood, you've probably all heard of the Robinhood app. So we started getting calls about this. We didn't even know what, we had to look this up. What's going on? What is this? So this is day trading. For a long time, we've known that stock market can be like gambling. That's been kind of a big question mark when we've had recovering gamblers. They've always said, but can I have money in the stock market? Is that gambling? And the answer's been, well, if you're putting money in a 401k and leaving it, that's not exactly gambling. But if you're doing day trading, that may be different. And indeed, this does look different. We downloaded the app here in our office just to see what it was like. And we were getting immediate push notifications constantly telling us to put our money here, put our money there. We're losing money, we're making money. So it was, I can certainly see how someone could have a rush of high over that. Some of the other terms you see over here, and you've heard these a lot: meme stock, cryptocurrency, bitchain, blockchain, game assets, token, NFT, non-fungible tokens. I always have to ask, what does that stand for again? Non-fungible token, digital world, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, so all those types of things. And that's been a big question. Is this gambling? I just saw an article a couple of days ago from the financial guy, Dave Ramsey, where he said this is very much like gambling. Again, it depends. It depends on the exactly what you're doing with it. But for a lot of people, especially those who are at risk for gambling addiction and those who are in recovery from gambling addiction, I see flashing warning signs for this. So it's definitely something to be careful about, and certainly something that we're getting calls about, not only on our gambling hotline, but on our mental health hotline. So it is becoming an issue. A note on social casino games. So you've probably seen these, Slotomania, Lucky Sevens, things like that. I think this is advertised a lot on Facebook. And so they mimic casino games, but they are not actually casino games. So you can't really win money, but you can spend money, if that makes sense. You can continue to spend money to have extra time to play, to have extra levels. But you're not actually going to have money deposited back in your account. I remember way back when, we first, these were first coming out, and we would have gamblers in recovery, and they would say to me, well, I'm not gambling anymore, but I'm doing these games, and isn't this okay because I'm not spending money? And I remember being like, yeah, that's fine. What's the difference? Now I understand that after going to a conference at the National Conference on Problem Gambling about this very issue, that was the exact wrong thing to say, that it is an issue. It's the exact same type of mechanism, the intermittent risk reward continuum, that gets gamblers into the action cycle. And in fact, about a quarter of people who start out playing this migrate to real gambling within 6 months. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Especially if you feel like you're doing really well at this game, you start thinking, hey, if this were real money, So some of these slides, and the reason they're phrased as questions, I took this from the recent talk that I did with teenagers at a high school recently, where I was trying to relate to them. And I know that they're not sneaking into casinos, but I know that kids are gambling. I talked to them about gambling in West Virginia, like I did you all, and they seem much more savvy than I thought about some of the things that are going on. Kids are considered 2 to 4 times more likely to be problem gamblers than adults. And I always thought that statistic sounded a little like, really? There've been multiple studies, but just didn't go with my real world experience. But as I've been talking to kids, and as we have surveyed them, we've surveyed about 2,000 kids here in West Virginia, middle and high school. It is definitely the case. And the reason is gaming and gambling are really converging. They're becoming very, very similar, almost hard to tell apart. And as that continues to occur, I think we're going to see more young people get involved in not just gaming, but gambling as well. I'm sure you all are familiar. A lot of you work with kids or have kids and don't need to be told that kids spend a lot of time on their phones. Okay, my own kids do too. And a lot of what is offered is very much like gambling that kids are dealing with. So I asked them, could they think of some ways that they are similar? And I've listed a few ways. Again, that there is the convergence. Games have gambling elements like social casinos and loot boxes. I don't know how many of you know what a loot box is. If we were in person, I would ask you to raise your hand. And I will tell you the interesting thing about this is it's almost, it's easy to divide by age. Who knows what it is? I will say I did not know what it was. I was in the age category that did not know that. But the younger folks not only know it, but they school me on it. They always tell me more than I know about this. So for those of you who have no idea what a loot box is, loot boxes are very common elements in most games that people are playing. Everything from where's some of the game, World of Warcraft. See, I don't even know these games names. The basketball game that kids play, NBA 2K, I think, and Fortnite, maybe, a lot of these games. So they have these boxes. Okay, so you're familiar with the concept of freemium. And what that means is that when you get a free game, often it ends up costing money. And those are the games, the truth is, that make more money than any of the others because, again, remember what I said earlier about the first bit is always free, right? So why is that? So a game is free, but you have to continue paying to get an extra level or to get an extra skin for your character, something like that. You have to continue paying for those things. And that's what we call freemium. That technically is not gambling. That's just paying for extra, okay? But a loot box is a little different because you're paying for a chance to get the thing that you want. So for instance, you want a special new color for your car or a special skin for your character, a new sword or gun for your character. You can pay $10 and maybe you'll get that in this box. Think of like I don't know, baseball cards, right? But maybe you won't get it. So that's the definition. That's why it is technically gambling. It's actually outlawed in most countries. It is not outlawed here in the United States. I do understand that a lot of video games are removing it because there's been a lot of pushbacks from people who are gambling advocates and frankly, pushbacks from people who play the games and don't enjoy that element or get mad that other people are able to just pay to get the things that they've spent hours working in this game to get. So loot boxes are very, very common. The same type of intermittent risk reward that gambling platforms use, and kids are definitely very familiar with these. By the way, if you have a kid or you work with kids and they ask for things like gift cards to apps or iTunes or the different platforms, often that's what they're using them for. Gambling platforms now look more and more like the games kids play, or I shouldn't just say kids, that anybody plays. I keep saying kids, and I've been corrected on this, that in fact, when you look at statistics, young adults are just as likely to be playing as kids. But so if you look at the platforms, you think about these incredibly high definition graphics that people are playing on their games now. So they can't very well go to a casino and be happy with an old style slot machine with 2 cherries and a lemon, right? So those machines are being reformed to look a lot more like the games that people are playing. Both allow non-cash transaction. That's a pretty big deal. It feels a little less like you're spending real money when you're able to use a token or a card, and especially if it's your mom's credit card. Both have a social element. A lot of people say that they go to the casino or video poker place so they can see their friends or talk with people. Some people, they say it's their main social outlet. Same thing with kids. A lot of times they're playing these games, posting about it on social media, and all of their friends are on it. And both can cost a lot of money. This is another question I asked Ben. I said, why do you think that how are some ways that video games and gambling keep you gambling? Guilt. This was one, all the kids in the class knew about this game. It's been a few years ago that it came out, and you would buy tokens to keep like your puppy or your kitten alive. And if you didn't buy enough tokens or spend enough money, you'd get a little push notification like, Rover's about to die. Are you sure you want that? And so a little bit of guilt there. Social, all their friends are playing. Status, are you the only one with last year's skin? I really didn't know or understand what a big deal this was. And we've heard in working with kids, we've heard people talk about kids actually being bullied because, they're whatever they're wearing in their video game is like so old school. It's like they're getting made fun of for, like the way, when I was younger, maybe people would comment on what style of jeans or sneakers that you had. Sunken cost fallacy. So this is this is really one of the most crucial elements in gambling as well as gaming. I mean, it works the same in both. I've spent this much, I've gone this far, I might as well keep going. Even though logically it makes sense that I'm going to stop at this point. And I gave them the example of someone who's invested a lot of time in a relationship that they see is going nowhere, and they think I should break up, but then they think, oh well, we've been together for 6 months now. It's a lot of time. We should just stay. It's the sunken cost fallacy. You can imagine how that works with gambling, especially. The near miss, you almost had it. So this is often not an accident, something where people say, oh, 2 cherries and a lemon. If only I'd had one more, something like that. And friendly reminders. Did you forget about us? So this works, I know in games and mobile devices, especially if you have push notifications enabled, there is a lot you're going to be hearing about, hey, here's an opportunity to invest. Why don't you bet on this? So you're going to get a lot of those in games. It's the same way. If you're not playing for a while, then you're going to get reminders about why aren't you playing. I don't know if you all saw the movie. Oh, I'm going to mess this up. I can't think of what it was. The Social Network. No, it's not the one about Facebook. It was a recent movie on Netflix that talked about like how your brain is sort of hijacked by gaming, and it had like showing the personification of game developers in your head saying, hey, Billy hasn't played for a day. We need to send him a notification. And so that's how it works with that. And with real life gambling, not digital, I know I did a training for folks who worked in a video poker parlor a while back, and they were telling me, when they have a lot of regulars, they said when people don't show up, when they haven't been there for a few days, or when it's their birthday or whatever, we call them, we tell them to come in, we tell them we miss them, and it is a friendly reminder. But these folks often are big tippers too, so works both ways. Freebies. I already said this. The first hit is always free. Those of you who work in substance use disorder have probably remembered talking about this. I mean, there's a reason that it doesn't cost you a lot of money the first time you play a game, or there's a reason that you're being mailed a free token for slot play, or given $500 in playing money for free. Okay, that is the end of the part of the presentation where I'm talking about gambling in West Virginia. So trying to think if there's anything else I need to tell you about that. West Virginia does have relatively high per capita gambling, more than many other states. And we have the highest per $1,000 in personal income spending on gambling. So what that means is, the money that we have, it tends to get spent on gambling more so than from people in other states. So it's a bigger problem. I truly think a much, much bigger problem than most people think it is. We do a lot of exhibiting. We have all those different helplines. And we were just talking about this yesterday and buying some new exhibit material. Like, the problem is when people see 1-800-GAMBLER, a lot of times they kind of walk past and laugh and say, oh, I bet you don't, or say, is that really a problem? Less so than it used to be, but people do still say, is that real? Is that a problem? Is that a real addiction? And I say, well, gosh, nobody ever walks past our Help for WV booth and says, oh, heroin, is that real? Does anybody really get addicted to that? Everyone knows to take that seriously, but people still are a little bit on the fence, like, is problem gambling the real thing? So I hope by the end of this, you understand that it is a real thing. And it is a pretty big deal. It's, I think the last statistic that I've seen, about 1 in 50 people in the state have a gambling addiction. I will tell you, my personal opinion is I think that is an undercount. Really, that was from a federal study, the last one done over 20 years ago. And almost all of those types of gambling that I just talked to you about were not around at that time. So I think it's probably more than that. I'm also just thinking anecdotally, again, if we were in person, what I usually start out doing is asking people, don't name them, but have you ever known anyone personally or professionally or a client you've worked with that you felt like gambled too much, spent too much time or money gambling? Almost always about 3/4 of the hands go up. So I would be surprised if it is still just 1 in 50. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about gambling addiction and what is problem gambling. It's technically called gambling disorder now. It has changed names a lot. Used to call it compulsive gambling, pathological gambling, problem gambling. They all sound really kind of awful, don't they? When I say problem, we just changed our name. You see down there, we have the Problem Gambling Help Network of West Virginia. We were always the Problem Gamblers Help Network of West Virginia. And we recently said, isn't that awful to be named as a problem? Would you want to be a problem anything, a problem eater, a problem this, a problem? So we said, let's call it the Problem Gambling and not, call names at the people who are calling us. So we just changed that. Although through this presentation, I may not have removed all the references to it. So what is gambling addiction? I'm assuming a lot of you have worked with a drug and alcohol addiction, so you're going to be very familiar with a lot of these symptoms. However, a lot of people say addiction is addiction is addiction, and I don't 100% agree with that because there are a few unique things to gambling addiction, and I will talk about that. But really, it's keeping gambling despite the problems that it's causing you in your life. It's that simple. A lot of people want to quantify it and say, well, I spend this much time gambling, or I spend this much money gambling. Is that a problem? Or, I can still pay the rent. I can still do this or that for my kids. Is that really a problem? But actually, it's not about that. It's about the impact it has on your life. And I give the example of, if you're someone who, drinks, like I can remember working in a unit many years ago and someone saying, well, I only have, 1 or 2, 3, whatever beers a night. How could I possibly be an alcoholic? Well, it's what is it? What kind of problems is that causing you in your life? Is your family's upset with you and you feel like you absolutely have to have it and you're doing things you wouldn't ordinarily do to sneak out and drink, then that's a problem. So that's the very simple definition of it. But there are symptoms, of course. It is in the DSM. It has moved around a lot over the years. It is now in the with the behavioral addictions. For a long time, it lived alongside the impulsive disorders, like it was there with like trichotillomania. I think it was a smart move to move it over. So there are 9 symptoms. You only have to have 4 is technically gambling disorder. 1 to 3 is see, I've got it there, problem gambler. But, you really only have to have even one of these, and you are eligible to call us because we are the Problem Gambling Help Network, not the Gambling Disorder Network. We're not strict. So the 9 symptoms, I'm going to talk about them and give you some examples from helpline calls that I've taken. Making unsuccessful efforts to stop, control, or cut back on gambling. People who call us are never calling for the first time. It's never like, okay, just today I thought this is a problem and I'm calling you right now. We wish that were the case. It would be much easier for folks, but it is not. People have usually tried everything under the sun by the time they call us. People often will say that they've given over control of finances to a loved one. If they're driving to a certain casino, they've routed themselves going to work a different route. They've tried to ban themselves from the facility, anything you can think of, but it's just not working. Chasing. This is a symptom that I really think maybe separates folks who are recreational from problem gambling. I think this is when you start seeing that divide, because as I mentioned, or I should have mentioned if I did not, because I don't mean to come across as the anti-gambling lady, it is a fact that the vast majority of people can gamble responsibly. There is a smaller percentage of people who cannot, but there are rules for responsible gambling available on our website, by the way, and this is one of the key things that people end up not following and I think crossing that line. So when people take money to gamble and they lose money and they didn't mean to lose that money, then they have to go get extra money and put it in the machine or their game, whatever they're doing, so they can try to get even again. That's when it becomes a problem. We always say, look at the cost of gambling as the cost of entertainment. And don't look at it as a way to make money. It's not an investment. But when people start looking at it as a way to make money, that's when it often becomes a problem. Preoccupation. So people think about gambling. When people have a gambling addiction, it is on their mind all the time. And think about this in terms of, I talked a little bit earlier about video games, right? And, video gaming disorder is a thing, right? I don't think it's in the DSM officially yet, but the WHO declared it a disorder. And if you look at the symptoms for gambling, video gaming disorder, almost mirrors gambling addiction. And this is one of them. This is something, and if you know someone who's on their phone all the time, someone who plays a lot of video games, this will ring true to you. But the same for gambling. I'm spending so much time thinking about it. So often when people call us, they'll say, I have a system. They all have a system. I mean, obviously the system is not working or they would not be calling us. But there is a system. So you might be thinking about system in terms of someone who's creating algorithms to bet on sports, or someone who's studying the races all day to handicap the horses, things like that. And that's a system. And you can imagine how much time goes into that. But it's not just that. Even things like slot machines, bingo, online games, things that really have no system, they definitely have a system for. And this is where you get into one of the real key elements of problem gambling that make it a little different, I think, than other addictions, because there's almost a mythical or a delusion characteristic to this. People who are gambling, even when there's no way to win, they will find a pattern. One of the questions I always ask people if we were in real life is, okay, if you walk into a casino and there's a hot machine over here and it's been paying off all night, there's a cold machine over here and it hasn't paid off for a long time, which one should you play to win? And then the room is usually split on that. And then I tell them, it's a trick question. These machines are operated by random number generators, and the past does not predict the future. And that works for many different types of gambling. It would be the same for bingo or for lottery tickets, right? You've probably seen websites where they can help you pick lottery numbers. We've talked to people who've kept diaries for years of lottery numbers. But the truth is, in random types of gambling, this may not be as much true for things like sports gambling or horse racing, but in random types of gambling, where it is mainly luck rather than skill, there is really nothing you can do to change the outcome of the future based on the past. However, people really have a hard time seeing that, and that becomes one of the key things that I know our therapists work with people on, changing that type of thinking. So preoccupation, very, very common, my gambling addiction. Lying, probably not a newsflash to you all that people who have addictions sometimes lie about it. They don't just lie to others, they lie to themselves often. We hear people say, how many times have you talked to someone that said, oh yeah, I went out gambling, I won so much money? How many times, conversely, have you heard someone say, I gambled and oh my gosh, what a mess, I lost everything? Well, probably you don't hear that as much. People tend to focus a lot more on their wins. But I think sometimes it's not outright lying as much as it is lying to themselves. A lot of people, for instance, will walk into a casino with say they walk in with $500 and they lose it all, but at some point in the night they have $100 hit. Likely when someone asks them how they did, they'll say, I won $100, not quite doing that math. So I'm lying. Family members, of course. Wow. Family members We have a whole separate presentation on family members and problem gambling. About 30% of the people who call us are family members. And they definitely have been lied to. And we get calls from people who say, my husband had all of his bills going to a P.O. box that I didn't know about because he didn't want me to know about the gambling. We get calls from people that say that they've known someone for years and they had no idea that they were gambling problematically. This is why we call it the silent addiction or the hidden addiction, because it's a little different. Again, with drugs and alcohol, you can't really see it on someone. If you're not in their bank account, you very well may not know about it. And frankly, even if you are, even if you're a close family member, it may be hidden from you. Escape. Many people aren't gambling to win money as much as they are gambling to escape stress, depression, grief, boredom, loneliness. I have boredom. I have boredom twice in this. I just noticed that. I must have got bored while I was writing this slide. So it is not uncommon for us to get a call from someone who says, I was gambling and it wasn't really a problem. We just went out every weekend. But then, my husband left me, or my kids grew up and went to college, or I lost my job, or my dad died, or some bad thing happened to them, some sort of trauma, and they just wanted to escape it. Or a physical trauma. A lot of people say I have back pain. I say, I don't think about that when I'm sitting there on the machine or when I'm playing. I'm not worried. I'm not stressed out. And that might seem counterintuitive. You're losing more money. Aren't you becoming more stressed? But, while you're in the action, a lot of these folks will say that they're really not thinking about their physical or emotional pain. Jeopardized relationships, loss of activities. I've already mentioned the spouses. And it is not unusual for us to get calls from people who've been married for really a lifetime, and they're getting divorced over problem gambling. Think about if any of you have retirement accounts, you're putting money in retirement, how hard it is to take that bit out of your paycheck and put it in the bank every month. And think about if you get to the end of your working life and you open that account, can't wait to stop working, and it's empty. All of that is gone. The person that your finances are intertwined with has spent it all, and you can't do anything about that. We took a call from a lady who had a second mortgage on her home, and she didn't know about it. Her friend called her and said, I just saw where your house is being auctioned off, literally on the courtroom steps, and she had no idea. People that have had their kids' college savings or their vacation funds just drained. Everything just gone. Work, and that's a big issue. We get a lot of calls from people who have embezzled from work, stolen from work. I'll be honest, every time I see a story in the paper about somebody that's like stole from the PTA or the Boy Scouts fund or the festival fund, and it's someone there, everybody's going like, she was the best person and we can't believe this happened. Like, in the back of my mind, I always think, was it gambling? Because we have just heard that on the helpline so many times. And what I'll tell you, and not at all justifying the theft of the money, but what I have always heard people say is, unlike someone who steals, like, hey, I'm going to buy, fur and diamonds and keep it. People who are gamblers who steal often think, okay, I just need to get even. If I can just take some money and play a little bit and then win back some money, then I'll be able to pay this back. And that is usually their intention. And it does not usually work that way. Tolerance. So again, with the comparisons with other addictions, nobody starts out drinking a case of beer a day, right? They start out with one beer. People often start out gambling responsibly. And again, just like many people can continue drinking responsibly, many people can continue gambling responsibly. But people start out a small amount, and then it gets more and more and more. And then it seems like they have to bet, went from $5, $10 to they're bringing in their whole paycheck. When people call us, they've spent literally loads of money. Often they have applied for many credit cards. Think about how many credit cards you get in the mail, or credit card statements, especially young people, like when they first going out to college, just get a ton of credit card offers, right? Think about if instead of, most of us probably throw out a lot of those, but what if you accepted every single one of them? think about that. Think about what your credit line would be. And if you're, addicted to gambling, that's one of the first things you might do. And then you might end up filing bankruptcy. And what happens when you file bankruptcy? It's one of the first things that happen. You're going to get a lot of offers for credit cards because they know you're sort of a sure bet, so to speak, because you can't file bankruptcy for a few more years. So they've spent, like I said, loads of money. Bailouts. So this is, this is when folks ask their friends or family for money. They almost never say, give me money for gambling. That wouldn't work. They say something like, I need money for groceries, or I'm behind in rent. Can you help me out? And this is something that I know our therapists spend a lot of time working with family members on, not enabling, not bailing out. That's a big issue. Remember, a lady called me, and her college son was spending all of his money gambling. And she said, well, I don't know what else to do. I pay his rent, I pay his cell phone. And we said, that's one of the things you got to not do, got to face some real world consequences. And I will say, on the other end of that, when we have had gamblers in treatment, often they tell us that the best thing that ever happened to them was their loved ones not bailing them out, because at that point, they knew that they had to get help. Withdrawal. So this has correlations with not only other addictions, substance use disorder, but also, again, when I talked about gaming disorder. So think about this. If you have a kid, or you work with kids and they're on their machines, that's what I always call them, you're all on your machines again. And you get to the point where you're like, okay, Billy, you've been on that for 2 hours now. You're past your time. Give it up. And how do most kids react to that? Well, usually not super pleasant, right? I mean, maybe some of them, but a lot of them are like, nope, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. So there is kind of not a physical withdrawal. We're not talking about like delirium tremors from alcohol, but there is an anger, a withdrawal. And I'll just, kind of side note here, I've heard this so many times from parents who say, there's that initial withdrawal and screaming and angry unhappiness, but I'll tell you, by the next day, I like that kid more when they're not on their machine as much. So with gambling, very much the same thing happens. You think about it. I was just talking about how many people are gambling as an escape for themselves. And so if we have removed the thing that you do to escape your stress, but not yet given you anything to replace that, it makes sense that you're going to have some irritability and anger. And especially when you look at this in terms of the money, and think about it. What if your whole life savings is wrapped up in a machine? Then it's going to make you really irritable to not have it. Because for a lot of people, it's sort of what we call the end of the fantasy. There's always the fantasy about winning a little bit more so you can just get even. And so when you decide to stop gambling, that ends. You may feel like you're giving that up, and you're not ever going to get even. You're going to have to face the consequences of what you've done and sort of deal with that financially. I mean, that's really the thing. It's what we call the insidious cycle of gambling addiction. And I think that is how it is most different than other addictions. Because most people wouldn't say, I drink too much. If I could just drink a little more, that would solve this. Same with drugs. But with gambling, people do tend to think, oh, well, if I just have one more spin at the wheel, if I can just win one more big bet, then I'm going to pay it all off. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen gambling movies, right? I mean, it's we have a whole presentation we do on gambling in the movies. It is highly popularized. And what always happens when you have a gambler in the movies, I mean, it's some version of the same story, that they end up getting desperate and doing something so they can try to just get that one more win so they can get even and pay off the debtors or the bad guys coming after them, or, the money that they've stolen from somewhere. It's always the same story. Prevalence rate. Well, I've talked about this a little. I wish we had a more recent study than 1999 to go off of. We did a study here in West Virginia. I will not say it was a telephone survey we had a local group do. Probably not as super scientific. It was not peer reviewed, but it was interesting that the statistics that we got really sort of similar to what it showed in the other study, actually a little bit more. And again, we did this, it was a few years ago. This was long before online gambling was available. So at least 1 in 50, I would say probably more. And that when I say that, excuse me, that's 1 in 50 like people in general. So that's not 1 in 50 people who gamble. That's everything, you, me, the whole world, people who don't necessarily gamble. 2 types of gamblers. So these are sort of the stereotypes, right? And I will say most of our people actually do not fall so neatly in either stereotype, but most people, when they think about gambling, they do think about this guy. This is what they imagine. And in a lot of states for a long time, this was more of the typical type gambler, not this lady over here on the bingo. So the action gambler, and most of the movies that you see that involve gambling are more about the action gambler. He's probably more interesting to watch, right? Unless you're watching on Lifetime. I think I've seen some of those that may be more about the escape gamblers. So again, I hate to say it's stereotypical, but it is often these are folks who are gambling at more high stakes, somewhat, there's always some luck involved, but somewhat skill level gambling. So things like poker or sports betting or handicapping horses, that tends to be more likely. And they are, I mentioned people gambling to escape. They are not escaping. They are gambling because they want to make money. You hear the term professional gambler a lot. And there are some people who have, don't gamble problematically and are able to gamble at that level. Most people, though, I will just say that we've had a lot of people call us who said they consider themselves a professional gambler. And at this point, they're seeing that they have an addiction and they're definitely classified as more of an action gambler. These folks would tend to be a lot of times, they work in things like sales, insurance, just things that are a little bit more high pressure, tend to be somewhat narcissistic. And so when I talk about the fact that we get way more calls from escape gamblers, why do you think that is? Well, if you've worked with narcissistic folks, do they call helplines? Probably not, right? I'm not saying they never would, but in general, these folks would not be the first to pick up a line and say, hey, I'm really having a problem with this. Can you all help me? So we don't get as many calls from these folks, although it is picking up a little with the advent of the different types of gambling that are available. We are getting more calls from folks like that. Escape gamblers tend to be more females, passive, codependent. A lot of times it's mental health problems or depression, anxiety, driving the bus on this one. Often they drink. A lot of people drink while they gamble. Very, very common. And so they would tend to be more likely to do that. Whereas the action gambler may want to keep a clear head and may be less likely to drink as he or she gambles. These folks like games of chance, unskilled, bingo, tips, slot machines, lottery tickets, and the addiction tends to progress more quickly. I will say, though, it's interesting. We used to say, well, it can take years for someone who's kind of an action gambler to get to that point where they know they need help. But at the same time, we looked at these people we started getting calls from when video slot machines became widely available here in West Virginia. Many of them were reporting 6 months or less that they developed an addiction. And this is only anecdotal. I have no studies to back this up, but I will tell you that our helpline folks tell me that 6 months is a long time compared to what they're hearing now. The people who are calling them who are addicted to the games on their mobile devices, a lot of them, it's just 2 or 3 months and they're already falling into some trouble. Gambling addiction has a lot of correlates, as you can imagine. Many studies, more than I could go through here, have shown that gambling is strongly correlated with many mental health issues, ADHD, depression, any kind of mood disorder, anxiety, PTSD. There is a whole separate presentation that we do on gambling in the military and PTSD, and it is a really big deal in the military. A lot of military bases have gambling. A lot of people in the military have dealt with PTSD. Our clinical director is actually the director of the one of the few inpatient programs for problem gambling in the country, Heather Chapman. She is director of the Brecksville treatment program specifically for veterans. And so she does a lot of our training, and she speaks expertly about this, but it is a really big deal in the military. Substance use disorder, and study after study has just shown that these two things go hand in hand. What we often hear are people who say, I was addicted, and I've been in recovery for 5 years now, and it never occurred to me. I know that I have to stay away, even though I was using heroin. I know that I can't even have beer because that could cause a problem. So they kind of know that, but they'll say, but it never occurred to me that I couldn't gamble. In fact, used to be we'd send people back when there was really no GA at all. We would send people to AA and say, well, at least it's a 12-step group. I remember one guy came back and said, yeah, you know what they did at the AA? They had a raffle. So very common for people to run into this issue because they don't really think of this exactly as something they can get addicted to. It's such an easy trap for people. It's the same, studies have shown it's the same areas of your brain. It really is. Family history of addiction. Somebody would say, what does the fact that my dad was an alcoholic have to do with the fact that I'm gambling now? What do those two things have in common? Well, if there's a genetic predisposition to addiction, it does not necessarily guide which type of addiction you're going to have. Also, family memories. We hear this a lot. People say, my grandma used to take me to the bingo, or my dad used to take me to the track with him, or my dad signed up for the sports gambling with me. So people have those memories, and that's definitely something hard to compete with. Significant life events. I mentioned the people who call who are telling us that they had something big in their life that they think caused the gambling or made it worse. We hear that quite a lot. Childhood trauma. I would guess every single topic that you all are attending at this conference, childhood trauma is central. It definitely affects and can be strongly correlated with problem gambling. Early big win. This is one that many people don't expect. Who doesn't want a big win, right? So what we hear often is that people will say, when this started for me, it was that night. I'll never forget it. I was at the casino. Thought it was the best night of my life at the time. I won $15,000 on that machine. They'll say, and then from there, things just got worse. Because what happens is you want to feel that again. You want to, not only get the money, but think of how when you win money, everybody's crowding around, just celebrating you. It's just a high, really. So you want that again. And so people end up putting more money in, hoping they can get it back. One example, and this is not someone who has called us, this is not any kind of client confidentiality, but if you all think of the Jack Whitaker, the guy who's kind of well known here in West Virginia that won the Powerball, at the time was the biggest ever. And I know he was later featured on one of those like Curse of the Lottery shows. Think about that. He was out all the problems in his life and the trouble. I remember some of it. He was out at a club and he had just thousands and thousands of dollars in his car and he was out gambling. So think about winning that much money and still needing the high of winning at gambling. It is very, very powerful. So this is the part where I start talking about us and who are we. I'm never sure if I think maybe I should put this at the very beginning so you know kind of who we are, what we are. We have been around the Problem Gambling Help Network for, well over 20 years. We were established, we were written into the statute that we exist and that our money comes from the lottery and is administered by the Department of Health and Human Resources. A lot of people are surprised by that. And they kind of laugh and they say, wait a minute, you're funded by the lottery. I had to kind of laugh because when I did that talk in the school, when I was nervous about talking to kids. So I brought like candy, like these little gold coins. I was throwing it to them as they got the right answer. I thought, well, that'll make them like me. So I'm telling them about us, that we're funded by the lottery, and I'm throwing them coins for the right questions, right answers. And I'm going over all the different gambling places in West Virginia. And I said, I'm afraid some of you might go home and tell your parents there was a lady from the lottery who threw gold coins and told us where the casino was for when we turned 18. So don't get me wrong. This is not what I'm trying to say. But we are funded by the lottery. And although that seems odd, it's like that in almost every state. And it's not a bad thing. Think about it. Think about, the struggles we've had with funding substance use in this state. It's gotten certainly better over the years, but think about, if companies like Budweiser were 100% funding all of it, there would be a lot more money. And so we are grateful to have the money. We are actually one of the best funded gambling programs in the country. So when I brag, as I will soon, about all the wonderful services we have, I will tell you, most states do not have these services. There are still many states, big states, where you call and you're lucky to get Gamblers Anonymous that might be 100 miles away, or you may get a counselor, although the counselor hasn't actually had gambling training, and you're going to have to pay for that yourself, or hope you have insurance. So we are really fortunate here, and our money has expanded each time that gambling has expanded. And one of the reasons for that, I think, some states have had, way back when legalized gambling, like Nevada, people weren't saying, hey, you need to put some money in for people who are going to need treatment from this. But by the time that gambling first became more legal here, people were thinking in those terms. So we're grateful for that. We are neutral. We really, really are. And I know sometimes I think I come across as a little anti-gambling because I am giving all of the examples of all the bad things that can happen to you when you gamble. But truly, we are not anti-gambling. And in fact, we used to get a lot of calls from people just annoyed with the amount of gambling that there is available in the state. And they would want to kind of blame it on that and say, this is the problem. I need to write letters. I need to get these out of my community. But we found that was sort of, didn't really work. I mean, it would be like if you were, addicted to alcohol and you're like, I've just got to get all these stores that sell beer out. I mean, first, good luck. You're not going to do that. I mean, gambling is a really high percentage of our state budget, but second, it's not going to address the underlying problem. So we are gambling neutral, but again, we are not pro gambling. We really try hard to not, promote gambling in any way. So what do we do to help people who have a gambling problem? Well, the first thing we do, ideally, wouldn't you prevent it, right? So I'm looking at my clock because I'm thinking I want to make sure I get you all out of here on time. I don't want to talk too long about our prevention efforts. I will just say we've done a lot of prevention recently. For the first maybe 15 years, we didn't have much in the way of that. And we've really stepped it up in the last few years. Used to be we would go out on our own. We have a pretty small staff of just on our problem gambling end, and we would, try to go out to schools or different places, or send out posters and talk to people. And then we got smart. We started taking some of the money that we have for advertising, and we started a mini grant program. So we have, I think, 20 different places that we contract with now. This has really grown. It was like 2 the first year. Now it's up to 20. And these are places like SAD chapters, FRN, sometimes they're churches, school clubs, even kind of after school centers, places like that. And we grant them, maybe $3,000 to $5,000. And we bring those folks in and we do a training with them. And we, it's probably about a 10, 15 hour training on the basics of gambling addiction, especially with teens and gambling addiction. And we give them an evidence-based curriculum, and we ask them to use that with the folks they're working with. And we give them all of our posters and brochures. And the nice thing is these are people who are already daily in the schools. So they're already, they're already working with kids. They don't have to figure out a way to get in the classroom, and they're talking to them about things like drunk driving and safe sex and not using drugs. So we say, hey, add one more thing to that, please. Talk to them about gambling addiction. And so that's been really successful for us. That's resulted in lots and lots of poster contests and video contests and billboard contests. I will tell you, I'm kind of surprised. A few of the billboards these kids have designed, especially those who are into graphic design, have been really as good as some we've had designed professionally. So that's been really nice. They've done the survey for us. You know, this survey has reached well over 2,000 kids now, and very, very interesting to look at this. It indicates that, you know, number one, kids are, you know, gambling, much to, like I said, I was even surprised by that, but they are gambling. It's not on, they're not sneaking into casinos. It's often on games. It's often at like Texas Hold'em, things like that. Their parents are often letting them gamble. I have a whole workshop I do on kids and gambling. I get on a soapbox about it, but if you've seen a prom or something decorated like a casino, right? That's pretty common. We always say you wouldn't stack a bunch of beer bottles and, you know, have that as a prom backdrop. Or if you've seen, you know, if you're looking for a poker set or something like that, where are you going to find it? It's in the toy department. That's where you find it. So I think prevention is very, very important. And I think we've greatly increased that in the last few years. We do this every year, and we do a request for proposals, and I think we're going to do another one in June. So watch our website, 1-800-GAMBLER.net, or I'll put my information in. You can shoot me an email and I will send it to the correct person if you're interested in making sure that your organization gets a shot at that grant. Again, it's around $3,000 to $5,000. And frankly, other than you having a couple staff come to the training, it's not a huge effort since these folks are often already in the schools or out in the community doing exhibits. We provide them with posters, brochures, trinkets. We have lots of trinkets that we give them to give away. Okay, what else do we do? Working with casinos, gaming operators. Just today, one of the casinos emailed and said, hey, I'm about out of brochures. Can you send some? So we're happy to do that. We have worked with various gaming operators at different times to do trainings for their staff, and we really enjoy that. We do, gosh, a lot of statewide presentations. I talk and talk and talk. You can see I don't mind it, but I do a lot of the talking. And we have other people here who talk as well. They might be more interesting than me. If you're interested in hearing from any of us, shoot me a note, because we're happy to come to your, you know, I've driven 4 hours to go to somebody's Rotary Club. We're happy to do that. Now, I will say the one kind of good thing about the pandemic has been, I don't love the Zoom. I like being in person better, but it has enabled us to reach a lot more people. So if you have a group that you want us to speak to, or your employees or clients you work with, we are always happy to do that. And so we do a lot of health fairs and conferences, things like that, not just for gambling, but actually all of our programs do that. We do a lot of training. So like I'm doing now, only way more intense and way more hours. We do a lot of gambling training. I would guess that almost every LPC, LISW, MA psych has been in but one of our network counselors at some point in time. We have trained a lot of people. And of course, we provide helpline and treatment resources, which I'll talk about in more detail. Oh, and media. I didn't even mention the media, and that's my whole job. I do the media. Again, we can't keep up with the land of newly minted millionaires, but we do a lot of billboards. These are few of my favorites. I think we have one now that just says "had enough," and it's a little shorter, but we think people who gamble are going to immediately get that. My favorite is probably this lady here. It's a few too many words for a billboard, but spending your golden years hooked to a machine. You know, that's if you've ever been in a casino. I don't know actually if they still do this, but there always was they might have a more high-tech way of doing it now, but there used to be a little hookup that you would get when you go in if you were in the Players Club, and you'd hook it to yourself, and yeah, it gives them player data, sort of the way your Kroger card does. And in exchange, maybe you would get some perks, things like that. So this was our play on words for that. Had an interesting journey through media. You know, you see over here, we have your ace in the hole. There is some controversy about should you have gambling symbols in gambling advertisements. I don't know. We tend to not do that as much anymore. You know, you wouldn't have clinking martinis for a alcohol abuse unit. But we try to, for the most part, have it portrayed not as something glamorous when we do use the symbols. Our treatment network. So we have about 50 clinicians right now. And I'll talk a bit about this because we are actually getting ready to do another new counselor training. So at the end, I will show you all where this information is in case you're interested. But we have about 50 people. And these are people who are generally licensed social workers, psychologists, or counselors. Most have master's degrees. Most of them either have their own agency or they work for an agency. Just basically the requirement is that they have to be able to provide private treatment to someone, right? We don't want somebody like coming to your house or whatever. Although I will mention, we have started, again, another pretty good thing about the pandemic. One good thing has been the expansion of telehealth. I think that's broken down barriers for a lot of people, definitely for our folks. And so although we are, training more clinicians, it's made it easier for people. I mean, usually when people call us, we're able to get them in very quickly with someone, and now with telehealth, even quicker. So we do a lot. When we take someone into our network, we just love these people. We really do. We try to do a lot. They're part of our little family. So we provide them with CEUs. The initial training is 30 hours, 30 to 35. So I know that's a little long, but we pay for their hotel, we pay for their food, we reimburse their travel, and we give them free CEUs, which is usually all somebody needs for a whole year. And then we provide clinical supervisions and advanced trainings. The advanced trainings are usually nice. We try to have them someplace nice and provide lots of really good updated information. And they're not just listening to me for all of these 30 hours. We have some of the best international speakers on problem gambling that come to these. So we go to the National Conference on Problem Gambling. Unfortunately, it's the second year in a row it's been virtual, but I'm confident it's going to be back up next year in person, I think in DC. But we often provide scholarships for several of our counselors who want to attend the national conference as well. These folks don't work for us. I should make that clear. They're contracts. So maybe they work at Prestera, or maybe they have their own little private practice, but they're seeing our people. So they're part of our network and they're being reimbursed for us. We are so fortunate to be able to pay for treatment for people who call us. Again, like I said, many states, you're not getting that. So we are able to pay for the first session, no questions asked. Even if they have insurance, we pay for that. We just think it's better to not have a barrier at the very beginning, and we have treatment funds. And it's a 2-hour session. And we, as I said, we reimburse our counselors for seeing these folks. And then after that, if they want to go back, and we hope that they go back, then we can continue to pay for treatment. If they don't have any way to pay, if they don't have insurance, or their insurance doesn't cover gambling, or our clinician is not in their network, or they have a really high deductible or copay, or a number of reasons that people may not be able to afford it. And so in those cases, we are able to take our funds and pay for up to 20 sessions for the person who's gambling, and up to 10 sessions for the loved one. A lot of people say, wait a minute, hold on, you pay for the loved one? And I've heard that from people who call us as well and say, hold on, my husband's the one with the gambling problem. You want me to go to counseling? Well, as I said, it's quite a shock to most people who discover that their loved one is gambling. And it's very important to get the loved ones involved in the treatment. Sometimes it ends up being relationship therapy, but we can pay for that. And we found that that's very, very useful. So again, when they call us, we know how important it is. We try to do this with all of our helplines. We really try to have a sense of immediacy, even urgency, that when someone calls, if you say, well, okay, in a week or two, we'll try to get you some help, then usually they're not going to make it. I mean, think about like if you have a toothache caused by a cavity and you want to call the dentist, and then they say, well, it's going to be a week. Well, what if in a day or two, even though you still have the cavity, like the pain goes away a little bit? We'll say, forget it. I don't want to go to that appointment. So we know that happens. That can happen with anything. And so definitely we try to get them in quickly. Usually it's within a couple days. we always say within our contract says within 30 miles of the residence. I think that is one thing that's been a bit changed from the pandemic. Now we don't have to worry about that quite as much because we can do telehealth if necessary. And we certainly refer to other services, which I'll talk about in a minute. What does the clinician do during that? So they do a real thorough diagnostic exam. They develop a treatment plan, and we work with them on that. Unlike our other lines, we really provide, we don't want to get in the weeds too much on this with folks, but we do try to provide them help and support because we've worked through a lot of treatment plans and we know what works. And so we work with them on developing a treatment plan, especially if we're paying for the treatment, to make sure that it does work and that it does have evidence-based best practices, interventions. And again, we make sure that they have other support services, which I'll talk about in a minute. Here's a few other things that we have. I don't know if I mentioned that we have the online chat. We do have that. And so that's just another way for people who call 1-800-GAMBLER, they can also chat with us and they get the very same people. We have informational mailing. I need to update this for the digital age because it's not just informational mailing anymore. We have all of that stuff online. So we have a self-help book, a workbook, a lot of things that we send people who call us. Support group referrals. So there are Gamblers Anonymous groups in West Virginia. There's not a lot of them. I think there are probably, I want to say 6 or 8, maybe there's a few more, but we definitely refer to those. Many of those have gone virtual during the pandemic. I don't know if they're all back yet. And we have that list. And, I could tell you to just go online to the GA website, but I will tell you much better is always to call us because we tend to keep in contact with those people. Meetings change around a lot. Like often people say, well, wasn't really working out at this church, so we had to move, or, well, so-and-so isn't part of the group anymore. Or he was listed as a leader. Now I've taken over. Those things just often don't get reported to the official website, but people tend to keep in contact with our staff. So we usually know what's going on. We do weekend retreats. Wow. This in itself is a whole session, so I'll just be really brief. I should show you, I wish I had thought to show you all the video we have on it. We're getting ready to do another one of these. So we don't have inpatient here in West Virginia. I don't know if we ever will have it. I will say that our outcomes of people who enter our treatment program are really good, like 80% of people doing well. So I don't know if it's necessary or not. There certainly are some people who feel like it is, but what we have as sort of a substitute for that is a weekend retreatment seminar. These are events we have usually twice a year, and we have them often at a state park or someplace like, the St. Paul, like the Catholic retreats that they have around the state. Typical kind of quiet type places. We try not to have them like at a big hotel, something like that. It just works really great for privacy. I think our next one is at Cedar Lakes in Jackson County. So we have them at places like that, and it's about 2.5 days of very intense, I will say, not just treatment, but fellowship. Often people come to this and they've never been to a GA meeting, never been to a support group meeting. It seems scary to them. All of a sudden, here they are with 70 other people in the state who have a gambling addiction and their loved ones. And it's almost it's almost a religious experience for some people. I've been to these, and truly by the end, when people first come in, they're so scared and nervous. A lot of them are mad. Honestly, there are probably more than a few who are drugged there by a loved one who didn't necessarily want to be there. But by the end, they're crying and hugging and kumbaya. They're literally singing, West Virginia, country roads take me home together. So, they exchange numbers and they keep in contact and have their own groups together. So it's a wonderful experience. And we try to offer, it's free, and we try to offer it to as many people as we can. There is always a waiting list though. And this year, unfortunately with the pandemic, we're trying to social distance. So I think it's already full. Oh, I think wasn't moving. Program highlights. This is where I brag about us, like as if I have not done that the whole time. But we do have, it's a unique system. And this is actually kind of goes for all of our helplines. But we really try to be very proactive. You know, we used to go to conferences and people would look at our data and say, well, how on earth do you get that data from people who just call a hotline? We can't even get their name. And we would say, because we really make an effort to develop a rapport with them. When people call us, you know, we try really hard not to sound like telemarketers. We say, you know, oh my gosh, I'm sorry this has happened. I'm glad you called. Tell me more about it. And we might be there just listening for an hour, not even asking any questions. But by the end of the talk, we've gotten all of her data because the person has told us everything going on in their life. You know, sometimes we're the first person they've ever told about this. And so it's just such a great experience for them to just have that conversation. I mean, it's not necessarily clinical, but I can tell you that when we've done follow-up, there are many people who credit just that first call with one of our helpline specialists as the thing that helped them quite a bit, even if they didn't go to further treatment. Many of our staff and network counselors are nationally certified, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We do have a lot of data collection, analysis, high recovery rates. About 80% of people who call us tell us they're able to stop or significantly reduce gambling by the 6-month mark. And that's an important point. You know, we used to just say, have you stopped gambling? It was a yes or no question. And then after a while, you know, we started thinking, well, is this the right way to frame it? Because there would be people who'd say, you know, I used to go to the casino every night and spend all my money, and now I'm just buying a lottery ticket once a month. But it was hard and fast. Okay, that's a yes, you're still gambling, you know, failure. And then we thought, well, we shouldn't really frame it that way. Let's say, are you still gambling, or have you really reduced your gambling? Because, you know, there are some people, you know, who are able to still do a different type of gambling or some gambling on a very limited basis. I mean, we all know that that's generally not the model that we look at in addiction as being ideal, but from a harm reduction standpoint, we know there are people who are able to do that. So we record that as well. So 80% stop or significantly reduce their gambling. Another note, you know, we used to get people who'd call us back. This shows how long I've been here in the very beginning. You know, we'd be like, oh, they called us a few months ago. Can you believe they're calling back? I guess we didn't do a good job. You know, that was kind of a failure on our part. And then after a while, we started figuring out, you know, wait a minute, relapse is part of every addiction. And it's actually a really good thing that they called us because the fact that they called us is telling us that we did a good job the first time. They trust us. They want us to help them again. So, you know what, people can call us as many times as they want. That goes for all of our helplines, by the way, and we are always happy to help them. So how do you screen for gambling addiction? Well, here's the very simplest screen. This is called the lie bet screen, and it's just 2 questions. Have you ever lied about your gambling? Have you felt the need to bet more and more with your gambling? And this is something analyzed by Harvard, and they said answering yes to one or both questions indicates the need for further assessment. So I should back up and say, obviously, the very first question is, do you gamble at all? I guess if somebody says, no, I've never gambled, there would be no need for these 2. But these are the 2 simple questions rather than having to go through the entire 9-symptom screen. When we've done community events, we sat down at, I think it was Health Right one day, and we had a surprisingly high number of people that were answering yes to this. We always encourage people, no matter where you work, and I know you all have a lot of paperwork. You know, I used to do, you know, field work, social work myself, and I hated the paperwork, but we always say, if you can squeeze in this one more question, you know, if you get this person, we have plenty of free treatment for them. And I'll tell you another project we've done before, and maybe some of you work at an agency where you would be interested in this. We've given stipends to agencies who are willing to add this to their intake and report back the results to us. We don't need anything confidential. We generally just ask for the percentage of people who are answering yes to both of those. And then, of course, we provide training to the folks who work there and hope that they give them all of the resources, including our phone number, if they do say yes. But if you work for an agency and you're interested, shoot me a note about that, because that might be something that we could partner with you at some point on. So what do you do if you find someone? So you've done what I've asked you. You have indeed asked them about their gambling behavior and you found, oh, I have someone here who's gambling too much. How can I help them? I want to tell you about, I've already told you about what we can do to help them, but I want to talk a little bit about what you can do to help them as well. Certainly make sure they know about us. We have a free treatment. They can go through a consult. They're under no obligation to go any further than that. You can have them sign a release and call for them, or you can have them call. The big advantage to calling us, even if you are the most, trained problem gambling clinician in the world, if we don't know about that person, they're not going to get all of our services. So that wonderful retreat I talked about, all of the Gamblers Anonymous meetings, anytime there's a GA meeting, people often will say, hey, would you send out a mailing to everyone who's called you from this area to let them know I'm starting one? So they're not going to be on that list. They're also not going to get follow-ups. If there's a new, Facebook group about gambling, or there's a new app to help people with gambling, all that stuff that we let all of our folks know about, they're not going to know about that if they don't call about us, because they're not on our list. So we always say, please, even if you're treating them yourself, have them call us so they can be on our list. We don't bug them. We're not going to send them a bunch of the spam, but we want them to know about all the services available for them. And another thing, we are often judged by the number of calls that we get, even though we do a lot more than just hotline. Frankly, if you look at the calls we get compared to like Help for WV, wow, they get like 12,000 a year. I mean, we don't even get probably 1,000 a year. And yes, of course, there are less gamblers than people who are maybe addicted to drugs and alcohol. But I think people are much less likely to call for gambling addiction. And if people don't call, then it might look like we don't have much of a gambling addiction here. A lot of people, unfortunately, that's how it's judged. Well, not many people have called that helpline. Must not be many people in this state that are gambling problematically. And we all know that is not true. So that is another great reason that I'll encourage you to have them, make their voice known as someone who's been affected by this. So I talked about our counselors, and I talked a little bit about our criteria for counselors. Just mentioning this, if anyone is interested, and at the end of this, I'm going to show you all our website if you're interested in taking our training for this. But this is a little bit of information about international certification for gambling counselors. And many of our counselors have this. I have this. Several of our staff have this. You can see it's pretty stringent. They do have to have at least 30 to 60 hours of gambling specific training, 100 hours of clinical treatment experience, and there's a few more things there. So we're very proud that we have several counselors who have this. And if you would go through our training, we would encourage you to get this as well, and we assist our counselors to get this. So if you are interested in, if you are unable to refer the person, let's just say they just say, no, I'm not signing a release. I don't want to go on a database. I don't want to talk to the 800 gambler people, or for whatever reason, you just feel like it's not prudent to refer them. And you say, I'm just going to try to do some treatment myself, especially if you're thinking this person is not even going to be a long-term client, and you want to know, what can you do to treat this person? The sort of the gold standard in the industry for assessment is the South Oaks gambling screen. And I have included a link here, but you can just Google that, South Oaks gambling screen. And that's what most people use when they're screening for level acuity of gambling addiction. So this is, there's several different. Some people, you can just look at the 9 symptoms in the DSM and you can follow those directions. Gamblers Anonymous has what they call the 20 questions. You can do that. But another thing that's considered more evidence-based is the SOG. So this is something that you can do with your clients to see at what point that they're at. The next thing that I think is really important is to assess for suicide. I mentioned we answer the suicide lifeline here, so this is always top of my mind, but just to really emphasize, problem gambling is highly correlated with suicide. There's some statistics from Heather Chapman, our clinical director. Problem gambling often associated with suicidal ideation attempts. Early onset of problem gambling increases lifetime risk of suicide. Gambling-related suicide attempts are higher among older people with problem gambling and those with comorbid substance use and mental health disorders. 2010, a study shown 17% of suicidal patients said they had a gambling addiction. So they were just much, much higher risk. Here's some, this is a little bit more current. This is something I think just in the last couple of years, research commissioned by a leading UK gambling charity, Gamble Aware, found problem gamblers are 6 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts or try to take their own life. The elevated risk remains even when correcting for other contributing factors. Stripping out all those factors, they found problem gamblers were 3 times more likely to commit suicide. Nearly 1 in 5, or 19%, had considered suicide in the last year, compared with 4% of the general population, while 4.7% of attempted suicides compared with 0.06 in the wider population. Now, gambling is one of the addiction. It has one of the higher rates of suicide for any addiction. And why would that be? Well, I think, we know that this is true for any addiction, but I will say the thing that's a little bit different for problem gambling is, think about if you're drugs and alcohol, once you quit, you often can reasonably get back your life, reasonably be healthy. With gambling, no matter what you do, no matter how many years you have not gambling, many of the financial problems are going to follow you, and you know that. Even with bankruptcy, it's something that it's very difficult to get around. So even if you haven't gambled for 2 years, you still owe all that money. And of course, we've had people who've said, I keep thinking about the life insurance, and maybe my family would be better off with that. So it's a very big deal for people who gamble too much. And we always screen for that on the telephone. Some of the things, are obviously asking if suicidal thoughts are present, never being afraid to ask the question, how far has the planning process proceeded? Have they ever done this in the past? Any recent stress? What's their capacity for self-regulation? I think and the debt, that's really important. I'll talk about that here in a minute, but these are all, just typical kind of questions that you want to talk with people about when you're asking about suicide.
Sheila, I just want to let you know we're at the 30-minute mark.
We're at the 30-minute mark. Okay. All right. So I will be able to finish up, I think, in about 15. That's good. I'll be able to take some questions. So one of the first things you want to do, remember I talked about the vicious cycle of problem gambling? You got to stop the debt, stop the bleeding. So that's so critical. Just like as if someone, again, addicted to drugs, you want to take care of the medical problem right away before they're going to rehab, right? If someone comes in and they're addicted to gambling, one of the first things you've got to do is deal with the finances, because if you ignore that, they're just going to go back to gambling. And this has been a challenge for us. Might surprise you to know that a lot of counselors and social workers we work with don't love math. Not stereotyping them, but I've heard that many times. They're like, hold on, I didn't go to school to be an accountant or a financial counselor. This isn't what I want to do. So we say, if you can refer them to credit counseling, there are a couple agencies I've listed here that they can be referred to, but really sometimes our counselors just have to kind of get down in the mud with them and go over these things. If they have a robust Gamblers Anonymous in their area, they have a meeting that they do where they have folks in the meeting go over with them all of their finances, and that's very helpful. But if you don't have access to that or the credit counseling, it's something that you've got to look at with them. The main thing is, what are you going to do if you're in this much debt? You've got to come up with a solution. So the solution might be, usually calling creditors. that's what the financial counseling does for folks, and you'd be surprised how often when you just call a creditor rather than ignoring them and say, hey, I got your messages, I can't pay all this. How about I pay this much? Make arrangements with all those creditors. Then the next thing might be, it might be that you have to get another job, even a second job. We've had lots of people do that. There are people who have gone the bankruptcy route, and that's a little controversial. in gambling circles, if that's a bailout or not, but we have certainly had a lot of people have to do that. Some people have had to sell their belongings or move into a smaller home, but whatever they've got to do to make this right, if you don't address that, I'm really in one of the first couple sessions, and that temptation to go back out there and spend just a little bit to get even is going to be there. Involve the family. So important. This is crucial because the family has been affected by this, maybe even more so than the gambler. And so if you can bring someone in, someone who's going to be a support. So we educate them about enabling and bailouts, of course, don't do it, right? But we also talk to them about how to support this person through their recovery. Often it turns into marriage or relationship counseling. Really, that's how a lot of people end up getting into therapy, because their loved one calls us and we send them to the counselor. Maybe they were hesitant, but they say to their loved one, the gambler, hey, I've been seeing this counselor about your gambling. And so maybe they're curious and they want to go in and see what is going on with that. Make arrangements for financial controls. That's very important. Some people really have to go the route of really legally getting a payee. Some people make informal arrangements with other people. Just like if you drink too much, if you have an alcohol addiction, you can't really have beer in your house. What do you do when you're a gambler? Your drug is the credit card or the cash. That is really a challenge. But that's when you've got to get the family in to help you. So sometimes it might be that somebody else is paying the bills, might be that someone else has access. Might literally be that they as an adult are getting an allowance from their loved one. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of issues that come about from that. So that's something counselors have to work on quite a bit. Offering resources, other than obviously telling them about us. There are Gamblers Anonymous meetings. As I said, I think there's at least 6 or 8 in the state. Gam-Anon is sort of like, it is like Al-Anon, which is for people who are impacted by a loved one's gambling, but there's not much in this state. There may be maybe one meeting, not much of that, unfortunately. Celebrate Recovery is a great resource because it is not necessarily AA or NA, and they're open to all addictions. We sometimes refer people to that if they don't have a GA in their area. During the pandemic, there have been a lot of online support groups, whether it be a Zoom meeting, a phone meeting, social media, a lot of not just local meetings, but a lot of national meetings have gone virtual. And that has allowed people in a funny way, again, I keep talking like I've enjoyed this pandemic. I have not, but this has been another one good thing. Somebody that might be really hesitant to walk into a church basement in their hometown to go to a GA meeting might feel confident calling and speaking to, there's 20 people on the phone and they don't know who you are. And it really, really is anonymous. Our group does wellness calls. We do those a couple times a month. So we do, that is free and open to anyone who calls us. And that's another thing. If we don't know about them, they don't know about these calls. And so that provides not just clinical, we have clinical guidance, but we also have peer support there as well. Self-bans. So make sure to let them know about self-bans. And this is something, again, all of these things, I should say, call us for the information. That's why I didn't give you websites for all these things, because they may be outdated by tomorrow. The self-ban information has changed a couple times recently. You are able to ban yourself from casinos in West Virginia, I believe, with just one form now, and that's been a recent change. But that is just casinos. That does not ban you from going to the video lottery places. But I will say there are some people that say, I don't go to those places, I only go to the casino. And so this is really helpful for them. And there's a software that can block gambling. It's called GamBlock on a lot of phones as well as desktop computers. And so people who are gambling online find that very useful. Inpatient treatment, I mentioned we don't really have inpatient here in West Virginia. There are a few inpatient centers in the country. Most of them will take people from out of state. I would say most of them are, in my experience, have not been covered by insurance. So it's something people would have to pay for. Maybe their insurance pays for part of it. So, honestly, it's not been something we have referred for a lot from here, other than If they are a veteran, we refer them to Brecksville for the free inpatient treatment. Harm reduction, one of the things to talk to them about is, especially if they're not at the point where they're ready to commit to stop gambling, is how can we at least limit the harm for this? One of the things we often do is have people keep kind of a journal of how much data, how much money are they bringing in, how much are they spending, and sometimes that's, that really wakes people up. Doing things like making sure that they don't have access to extra money to gamble with, or setting limits. One of the key rules to responsible gambling is setting limits. So making sure they only gamble with designated money. So making sure that they paying attention to their physical needs. It's not so much about the money often as it is the time. How many hours are they spending there? People call us and they've spent 12 hours in a row gambling, or like I mentioned, the gaming, same thing. Some common interventions. First, of course, address co-occurring disorders, and this is very common. Another thing, and I didn't even put this in here, I should have mentioned, there are several medications that people take, and I know you've all probably seen the commercials that say, like, taking this drug and the fine print can cause gambling disorders. And some of those include a lot of drugs for Parkinson's. I want to say Requip and Parapax. There's a whole list of them you can find online. They're often prescribed for Parkinson's or restless leg. The other thing I've heard is Abilify. So those are some common medications that have been prescribed for people that sometimes can increase these disorders. So we always say check for that. Understanding motivations for gambling. You've got to determine if you're dealing with someone who is a escape gambler or a action gambler, and the way you treat them is going to be very different depending on that. We look at the impulse to action cycle. I know any of you who are clinical are familiar with that. Exposure therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, of course, gold standard for many types of interventions, and definitely as well for problem gambling. Addressing cognitive bias and errors. This is another thing that when I say it is a little different than other addictions, people really there's a whole list of gambling myths, and there's a lot of workbooks that work on these. People really, not just the patterns, but and the sunken cost fallacy, but people really have pretty set ideas about gambling. A lot of times people will think, well, I'm due a win. I've already lost. I'm due. This has got to be the way it works. And they just have a lot of errors in their thinking. And that's something that our therapists work a lot with on them. In fact, many times I've called it a deprogramming, because that is very close to what it is. In fact, one of the interventions that we do, we had I'm sure it's online now, it used to be a CD, and it was called the Slot Tutorial. And we educated them about how gambling, actually the machines work, how the numbers are generated through a random number generator, and how they really could not beat it. And honestly, for some of them, that was quite a wake-up call. So this is getting to the end. I do want to thank you all so much. I cannot believe there were this many of you, and I am way excited. I hope there are this many for my talk tomorrow. Please, if you are interested in helping us with outreach, I said take some brochures as if we're right here together. I wish I could hand them to you. You can email me. I'll put my email in the chat, and you can download some of our stuff from our website, 1-800-GAMBLER.net, but I would be tickled to mail you a whole bunch of brochures and posters. We have regular gambling stuff. We have stuff for youth. We have stuff for every category. So we'd love to do that. If you have any presentations you want us to talk to folks about, listen, we can talk for 10 minutes or 10 hours. We can do whatever you want. We can talk for a long time, and we offer free CEU. So let us know. And keep your eye out, 1-800-GAMBLER.net or our Facebook or Twitter, Instagram for announcement about our prevention efforts if you're interested in having your group partner with us. And I do want to tell you, in case any of you were interested in training, let me take you to our website here. You see our website, well, you see the First Choice website. Here's the 1-800-GAMBLER website. Okay, and that has a really brief screen, by the way. If you, I think it has the 9 questions if you have a client and you want them to take that. And then if you scroll down to the bottom here, see the Become Part of Our Network. So This is about the next new counselor training that we're having. And I know it's not full yet because they're just starting to advertise for that. I think it says 35 hours. It might only be 30. I'm not sure, but we're having it June 21st through 25th at the retreat. I don't know if y'all know where that is. It's up kind of near the airport. It's a really nice place here in Charleston. And again, we do reimburse for travel. And if you are interested in attending that, all you have to do is go down here, you hit that click here, and there's a little jot form, electronic application that comes up. And then we will send you an application to become part of our training. We would love to have you be one of our network clinicians. Okay, I will stop my share and I will put my email in here for if any of you are interested in that. And let's see here, if there are any questions.
Yes, we did have a couple questions. So the first one is, are you going to make the PowerPoint accessible to those interested?
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. And a second question that I came across, or might be more soon now, what would you say to a family member of a problem gambler? How do you help someone who doesn't admit to the problem, but the family member calls?
We get that a lot. About 30% of people who call us are actually the family members. So we work with them. Sometimes they, as I said, end up seeing a counselor themselves. And really one of the things we do work with them on is the finances. I mean, not us personally, but we get them referred for that or have the counselor work with them because there are a lot of things, we have a whole checklist of things that people need to do. We're like, okay, is the money in his name, your name? What about the bank accounts? You need to make sure things are in your name. You need to make sure you're not responsible for all of this. You need to have your own money. So we work a lot on that. And you do a credit check on yourself. That's the first thing we always say. And that's when a lot of people get big surprises. And then we talk to them about, making sure to not enable and not bail out. We talk to them about how to do an intervention. You'll remember that show used to be on intervention. We had the lady, her name was Candy. She was from that show. We had her come here once and do a whole thing with our counselors on teaching people to do interventions. Funny thing was, then people, I think, called us and thought we were going to drag people out of their cars and take them to some place to do an intervention. We don't do that, but we did teach them how to do that. So we can work with them on their own personal stuff, some financial stuff, and then we can help them learn how to do an intervention. And again, one of the most effective ways is just when they get into treatment themselves, and then the gambler sees that they're in treatment because of their gambling addiction, and that often will make them say, well, maybe I'll go see what's going on here, or I might be headed for divorce.
Okay, great. And another question was, do you see a lot of problem gamblers that are or have taken Requip for the restless legs?
Yes, that is a really big deal. And I remember it wasn't Requip, it was whatever drug was before that, one of the originals. I can't think of it now, that was prescribed for that. And I remember a little lady who had never gambled in her whole life, and she all of a sudden was a raging, problem gambler, having all these issues. And looking back, medical assessment, it was that drug. And when she went off it, the thing is, unfortunately, it's not like, oh, well, that solves the whole problem, because at that point you've already got that kind of addiction mentality and entrenched in your mind. But taking her off the medicines was one of the first steps. Yes, we asked callers about that. There have been many, I know you've all heard it in the quick print at the end of the commercials, but it's there for a reason. It really is a big deal. And when you go to the national conferences on problem gambling, it is talked about for sure. Oh, Danielle, I just sent you my email. I don't know how to send it to everyone. If you wouldn't mind sending it to everyone.
I sure can.
Thank you. And then if you have anything you would like to partner with us on, or any other questions or anything, we are very happy to send that to you. All right, let me look at some of these others.
And if for those, while she's checking those out, if there was any folks that wanted some more of that information, please directly email her so that we can make sure you're able to get that connection started. Because I saw some people request in the chat, but I want to make sure she actually gets them.
Saw someone who said they lost someone to suicide and a gambling addiction was a factor. I'm sorry to hear that. That is all too often the case. What were the machines that led to increase in gambling? Well, what were the medicines? I'm sorry. Yeah, we did talk about that, like the Requip, the Maripax, the Abilify. Those are some of them. Would you consider online auctions? Well, that's interesting. So no, we have not gotten a lot of calls for them, but we do get various calls for behavioral kind of addictions like that are very similar. I mean, I absolutely think it can be the same thing. I will tell you, I got a call a few years back from people that were doing if y'all remember Longenberger, they used to make those baskets. And so we got calls from people that were doing a Longenberger basket bingos, and they had become addicted. So there was no money they were trying to get. They were trying to get these baskets that really they could have just went out and bought for the money they were spending going from state to state, going to these basket bingos, but it became an obsession with them. So yeah, I mean, I think any kind of behavior like that can be very similar to gambling addiction. Bitcoin, someone asked about that. Yep, we're hearing a lot more about that. I'm sorry, Megan asked me if her full name shows. It sure does.
Oh, yeah.
Someone asked for brochures. If you can, how do I get that? Will you send me the chat, or will I?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can save it and send it to you.
Thank you. Do you see gamblers take them Requip? Yes. I should. I'm sorry. I should have a lot of questions about that. I should have taken more notes on that, so I can give y'all more information on that. People returning overstocked items. Yeah, that definitely more about the online auctions. Maybe we need to talk more about that. How many times a year do we offer it? It's usually about once, sometimes twice a year. It just depends on what areas we have where we're lacking counselors. After June, we probably won't do another one for, usually it's at least 6 months after that. Are you aware of gambling prevention curriculum? There sure is. Wouldn't it be smart if I could tell you what it was? I think it's called Stacked Deck, but we actually do order that from a company that's developed evidence-based curriculum. So when we do these grants to our prevention groups, that's something that we do. We buy that for them so they can present it in the schools. Okay. I think that's it for the questions. Boy, you all have been a fantastic group. Oh, I see now I'm recording live on YouTube. For some reason, that makes me nervous. I was like, oh.
Yeah, I think they started doing that earlier today, but I think it's on a private channel. I'm not sure.
I don't think I'm going to go viral or anything, but I always think,
you never know. Information is key, so people will learn about gambling.
I hope so. Danielle, you have been fantastic. Can you come to all my presentations, because you're so pleasant and you're smiling the whole time? That's a big help when you look at someone and they're smiling.
Well, we can maybe work something out. I'll check my schedule. Anyone have any additional questions, thoughts, or comments for Sheila?
One question. If you're a resident of West Virginia, but you no longer live in the state and you would like to get the certification, would you be better off getting the certification through West Virginia or in the state that you currently reside in?
It depends on exactly where you live or how close to the border. We do have a couple counselors that are right on the border, and they see a lot of West Virginia people. So they've gone through our training.
I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Okay, you're not. It would be better in your state then, because you would be able to treat people from your state. We also, by the way, answer the helpline for the Virginia Council on Problem Gambling. So we help them with some stuff as well. But yeah, most states have some sort of a certification process.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question. Anybody else? I think we definitely got a lot of great information. So thank you, Sheila.
Thank you all.
And if you all have already commented in the section with your names, thank you. Was there anything else that you had, Sheila?
That is all I have. I'm done talking. My mouth is dry. I so much appreciate all your attention.
Yes, thank you, folks. We will go ahead. Yes, applause. So we will go ahead and part for this evening. Thank you all for making this a great first day of our 2021 spring conference. And we will do this all again tomorrow, won't we? All right, you all be safe. Have a good evening and get some rest because we're going to have another full day tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
We all done?
We are done.
Okay, well, I'm gonna drop it out then.
All righty. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.